Humankind game released well over 4 years ago, and over that time a sequel has been clearly signalled. Long-time faithful subscribers here will know that despite Humankind's many flaws, from end-turn bugs to balance woes, I enjoy it, and I've covered it a lot here over the years, and as a result, I've been daydreaming a bit recently about that sequel, a Humankind 2, so to speak. Especially since Civilization 7 released in February 2025, because we all know just how well that went. This game, Humankind, has also struggled immensely over the years. It's no coincidence that both Humankind and Civ 7 embrace a Civ-changing format. Your leader stays the same throughout the game, but your civs, or cultures as they are here in Humankind, change. In fact, they can change like 3 times as often here as they do in Civ 7. Humankind was somewhat of a pioneer, and Civ 7 suffered the same mixed response to changing civilizations, though with a much richer tradition behind it. But enough about the past and traditions, let's focus on the future. Specifically, what might a sequel to Humankind game look like? My wish list of sorts. What should or could it do to be a better version of the original? Let's talk Humankind 2. Beyond the bugs, how I want a 4X strategy game to be balanced, and balance here in Humankind, it's always a tricky point for me. It needs to have rules of the game, norms and order, to have structure and provide a challenge. But I'm also usually disappointed when a game chooses to nerf its factions, chop them down, making them kind of linear carbon copies of one another, in almost any sense beyond their name and facade. I'd much rather have a game with difference, diverging factions and civs indeed, that lean into what they do best. I'm assuming that a Humankind sequel will be an Amplitude game, and that means they'll not struggle to build unique identities should they choose to. Endless Legend 2 is a great, very relevant, very recent example of how Amplitude can make deep and rich factions. And while that level of complexity probably goes beyond a Civ-like game, at least in some areas, it shouldn't be ignored. Here, or when we're thinking about Humankind 2, even if it were to be applied to side mechanics like independent people. Endless Legend 2 is also another great example of Amplitude's excellent sound and visual design, something Humankind excels at in my subjective view, and something a sequel will look to do too. The broader balance that underpins that design though, and design philosophy, will probably end up being similar to the original game, or at least reflect the team's approach. I don't want them to step away from it. But, he says, kind of sitting on the fence here and hoping it's not taken out of a much wider context, I think some level of consistency or sensibility needs to be applied. There needs to be greater sensitivity to how benefits stack. Some hold on almost an indefinite layer on the game, right? Trait on top of trait on top of trait, to the point where it's almost absurd. Yields to the scale and levels that fully broke immersive competition. There should be many, in fact too many, branching paths and possible strategies, but that can't routinely allow for absurdly broken conditions, I don't think. Sorry to be a bit of a party pooper here, but it does need to be addressed. There are a few areas that come to mind from Humankind the First. Districts, specifically adjacency interactions, again layered effects, and their many other interactions and benefits are one very good example. Let's shift gears for a moment here though, and focus on my next section, the defining difference of Humankind compared to Civ or Civ-like games, its many eras, and the transition from one culture to the next. Simply put, of course, here your leader stays the same, but your culture can change. That means your unique units or improvements will change too. Your cultural affinity, the typing, will also more than likely change if you're shifting from, say, an agrarian to a scientific one or whatever it may be. The affinities have generally very powerful effects and actions, though these have changed a lot over time. A lot. And you'll know that if you've played the game over the years. I feel it is often a little bit too easy, especially for newer players, to overlook just how significant this part of the culture, the civs, right, that you're using and selecting really is. Perhaps a Humankind 2 might better highlight that these are central to the game and the civs. And maybe they could have some kind of stacking or packages of cultures available more broadly. that are tied by that affinity. Though just like Civilization 7, I also like the idea of packaging cultures together based on shared histories. This one maybe makes sense, maybe it doesn't. It depends on the overarching structure that they're going to take. But it could make sense to pair these like-for-like cultures, either based on affinity or history, together. And just with Civilization 7, I feel like Humankind 2 could benefit from having optional, predefined pathways here. Something to explore, not necessarily a fault of Humankind, and it would take the game away from its initial legacy. So let's step back a little further then, and assess the cultures and eras system as a whole. It's a system I've always quite liked. I've quite liked what Humankind does here, a sort of score-based system stretching across all different elements of the game. Yet, there's plenty of room for improvement. Humankind's eras, like ages, are broadly based on history, of course, including the uniquely fun Neolithic era at the start of the game, where you don't have a culture per se. There are 7 eras total, counting that one. From ancient to contemporary, 6 cultures can be selected, 1 per era, of course. The option to transcend culture, to stay the same into the next age, also exists, and the benefits here have been tweaked over time, but I've always found it to be a bit lackluster, generally underpowered, and mostly an unfun option. Humankind 2 really ought to make sure that this is either a more attractive option, or not a part of its broader structure, I think. The new eras, of course, bring more than just culture change. The era is player-specific, so I can race ahead of you without dragging the whole game into a harsh age transition like Civilization 7. And my choice to change eras is mine and mine alone. There's a very satisfying trade-off here, between remaining in the current era to earn more stars, those progression milestones that will ultimately fuel that victory, or actually racing through to get access to some of the other things that are unique to eras, like their technology trees and of course the buildings and units and infrastructure that comes with them. To soften the need to race through, Humankind eventually patched in the ability to have duplicate cultures in one game by default. Before that, or with the option disabled of course, players have to race their way to be the first to get their pick. And while I liked that competitive nature of the race, I definitely do, it fundamentally meant sabotaging your own game by skipping most of the potential of an era or many eras just to play for a brief moment with the culture that you might want, or get to something that you need to get to defend yourself. It also messes with the game a bit too much, in that case, when one player may blindly steamroll to an advanced era, and it kind of disincentivizes the whole structure of the thing. While that element of the rush is now an optional bygone, I think the eras system as a whole still needs refinement. It never really scaled all that well. Again, something that's got better with time. The game is in fact in a great state, Humankind 1, these days, but it never really quite got there, did it? As someone who prefers to play my 4X games on a faster speed, it's funny that my recommendation for Humankind is that this game is at its best as slow as you can go. You have 6 fulsome eras to advance through, with their own technology trees, units, improvements, game mechanics, as well as they're gradually introduced. Each era has huge potential with its stars, and Humankind is a beautiful game to behold, especially for its time period. The thing is, finding 40 or 50 or 100 hours to marvel at that map in a marathon game, whatever it takes to run a campaign like that, it isn't always easy. So like me, if you're playing fast, maybe even online or multiplayer, Humankind's eras and progression can simply feel too rushed, too condensed, too easily skipped over. And that has flow-on impacts. When the cultures around you feel like they're changing all the time, it's hard to place who's who. The game can feel almost out of control, and it becomes too difficult to make sense of the world. I'm not entirely sure how to solve this without just saying, hey, scrap the civ switching mechanic. Or perhaps dismiss it by just scrapping the era stars. Or maybe remove their impact on victory. Make it so earlier stars, as a slightly softer option, don't contribute to victory in the same way that the later ones do, maybe with some extra ring fencing in place. That could help. Or, thinking a little bit further outside of the box here, they could lean into the depth like Old World and that kind of focused approach. Talking of old world, Jumbo from the future here, briefly interrupting to let you know that old world is one of the games included in maybe the best games collection they've ever done to date. It's the Jingle Jam games collection. I'm participating in the fundraiser this year. My participation is going towards War Child, an international charity with, I think, some of the hardest work on the planet. If you have any extra cash this season and you'd like to donate, please contribute. I've set a target of £1,000. If you donate £35 or more, you'll receive the Jingle Jam Games collection, which includes Old World, a fantastic 4X strategy game, as well as actually quite a few other games that you might be interested in. So, anyway, enough of that. If you would like to give a little or a lot, please consider it. Link on screen, of course, as well as down below. Let's get back to the video. Maybe a new game isn't another kind of Civ clone humanity-spanning game, but rather one that focuses on a certain period of history, instead of doing the whole Civ thing from caveman to spaceship. If it's Humankind 2, though, that probably won't be it. Perhaps a true Humankind sequel might look to settle on eras or ages just like the original, but different in number and scale. I don't know what the ideal number is for you, but my one has a couple of caveats. For example, my number, whatever it may be, is lower if culture changing is still happening every era, and if they don't break up affinities from cultures or change it in some way, keeping them tied together instead of having them like an empire bonus or something distinct, something more to do with the managerial structure of the empire and less to do with the innate culture. I don't know. Assuming the other structures stay fairly similar, I think the eras could be condensed down from the 6 plus Neolithic to 4 or maybe 5, specifically looking at tightening the mid-game a little bit around the earlier modern ages. These will, of course, always present trade-offs. Again. This time, though, it's a trade-off between historical accuracy and game design. I think bigger areas of the game, a greater opportunity to explore different parts of the game would be really helpful. And therefore, bigger eras with fewer transitions could be a reasonable trade-off. Don't let science cultures research into the next age, maybe, though. Especially if there's only like 3 or 4 of them, please. Fewer ages ultimately means fewer transitions, broader technology trees, and more time with each unique unit or civ and culture ability. Chuck in a few other associated evolutions, like earlier era stars having little to no impact on victory, or more rigid culture options or packages that mirror history, and Humankind 1's system could be iterated on or evolved into something a little bit more readable, less rushed, and better sorted to varying game speeds and settings. There are a lot of idea rabbit holes I could go down here, but I'm not going to pump out a 4-hour-long video just to milk the ad revenue, so I'd like to transition to some other game mechanics. A slightly more rapid-fire look, in fact, at some elements of Humankind 1. Diplomacy and AI is the first one that comes to mind. Both of these areas definitely need some work. Granted, diplomacy has improved with the DLC, but it's a paid extra DLC. And it basically goes without saying on the AI front that it must get better. The over-reliance on cheating and bonuses for stupid AI frustrates people and takes away from otherwise great areas of the game. Areas like combat, which I've always enjoyed. These round-based fights within the map, though sometimes they can drag their heels just a little bit too much. They're based on the actual map, but ring-fenced by that battle zone, that whitened zone. And these fights are generally pretty fun. I'm sure some more abilities, more impactful geographies, and diverse units would make this 4X combat system even better. My biggest gripe with Humankind's combat actually, though, has nothing to do with the features, but rather the function. It is still, and certainly was, very buggy. It can glitch out the turn, sometimes the enemies just won't move, or the boundaries make almost no sense. So, refine it a little, iron out the rough edges, and maybe add in a little bit of extra substance. Culture and religion are two fairly similar systems in Humankind, working often in the background, but always supported by your improvements, wonders, holy sites, etc. that you have been building, as well as your culture decision and how you choose to use that or its ability. Or other elements, like diplomacy and how you're connected with other empires. These systems have both become more readable over time, and I like what they've done. I'm not really a fan of making these systems more manual, especially not in a traditional Civ sense. Adding in civilian units for me to repetitively spam out, click around the map, perform action, I just think that that is dull. I might be going heavily against the grain here, but I think that the systems of both culture and religion could largely remain unchanged. Perhaps less reliance on population count might make it better reflect some elements of soft power, and certainly more transparency on how it's working would be helpful too. I think trade and the newer stealth mechanics can also fairly easily be lumped in here, as they tend to work and be presented in kind of similar ways. I see a lot of similarity between them. One thing, though, let's try and keep core mechanics like diplomacy and influence within the base game next time. Please. I know there are lots of incentives against that, but please. There's something else that I've largely overlooked so far, and that's the leaders in Humankind. This personas model allowed us to create, should we choose to, our own avatars, with custom traits and AI behaviors. Again, should you choose, you could download other people's shareable personas too. The feature allowed for specialized voiceover personas, and I have a lot of fun playing against some of your personas. I still do to this day, and they were a really fun touch. The thing is though, when you make a Civ-like 4X historical strategy game that spans the history of human civilizations, using historical cultures and development along the way, this creates a certain cultural, historical expectation, and that wasn't met with Humankind 1. While the game has made some advancements, and patched in extra figures over time, it fundamentally doesn't scratch the itch that many would have rightfully expected it to. It probably needs a fulsome roster of historical leaders to even try to make a stand against civilization. And also, that often controversial Civ switching system could work a little better if this is ironed out as well. Leaders should match the cultures in a meaningful way, is basically what I'm saying. The pairings should generally be obvious. Now don't get me wrong, I am all for being introduced to new historical figures when they're added into these games. I like it, I do. If I'm unfamiliar with one, it shines a light on them. A piece of history that I'm maybe a little bit ignorant towards, it teaches me something new. I love learning history. And I'm certainly not going to sit here grumbling because the new leader's a girl, or anything like that. But a Civ without Gandhi? What about the Gandhi nukes meme? Dismiss it as lame fan service if you want, but key figures, not just to real history, but also to the broader Civ-like community. I'm going to stretch this out a little bit, but you have to bear with me here because I think it works. Those expectations shouldn't be ignored, even though we're not talking about a Civ game. I think there needs to be at least part of the Persona roster in Humankind 2 dedicated to historical leaders of the greatest significance to history and our pop culture understanding around them. I'm talking about Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, Montezuma, and Gandhi. And I'm sure you've got a list of someone who jumped into your head, maybe 5 names, 10 even, that you would add there as well. On a slightly less critical, more aspirational side of this wish list of sorts, I'd love to see Amplitude do what they really do best: thrive here. From Humankind to Endless Legend 2, I love what they do with sound design and artistic direction generally. The little design elements, dudes in the cities, through to the big picture stuff, always looks great. Perhaps a few ideas could be borrowed or slightly repurposed from other games. More on the mechanical side, less on the artwork side. Here I'm thinking Civilization 7's navigable rivers would go great in this world. Naval commanders too, could be another fun layer to Humankind's naval gameplay, which I've always enjoyed. Its influence mechanic, Civ 7's that is, could also fit fairly easily within a Humankind game, a base game. Games like Civ 5 have introduced near-future, or almost sci-fi elements to their very late games. From giant death robots to XCOM squads, Humankind 2 should also look to try and replicate a little bit of that fun, I think. Or at the very least, it should include present-day technologies. Maybe we could include something to do with drones or missiles or whatever. If not, lean into a fun future ending even more broadly than that. Personally, I'd also love to see a stepped up endgame weapons selection. Weapons of mass destruction here too. Let's also use Humankind in Endless Legend 2 as the base for better independent people. More unique and more powerful in their own little ways. Perhaps they could rise and fall better over time, and that idea could, if we're feeling fruity, be applied more broadly to a Humankind 2. In the same way that Ara has a slightly unforgiving mechanic for empires who truly fall behind as it moves through its take on ages, maybe Humankind could do something similar with the rising and falling of empires. Speaking of Amplitude's previous work though, I expect much of Humankind 2 to follow in their legacy. Like the territories and cities system that's fairly familiar across this kind of game from Amplitude, maybe with an extra layer, a foundational layer also added on top. A Humankind sequel needs to ensure that Sprawl or Tool doesn't become the only playable option, whichever one it may be, though in its history it tends to be Sprawl. Depending on the patch or version, Humankind far too easily struggled with sprawling, repetitive districts because of those yields that we were talking about earlier and some of the balance concerns. They would, and can, and do, grow completely out of control. Shrinking the number of stackable changing traits, cultural benefits, stuff like that would help with this part as well. It is ultimately entirely possible to do away with the flexible culture system altogether here for a fundamentally classic Civ experience too. And there's an opening in the market for that right now, even if it's just an option. I don't want Humankind 2 to go that far though, personally. But it needs to evolve somehow to avoid the pitfalls of its predecessor. Stranger things have happened than franchises throwing out a formula. Look at the jump in Civs from 6, 7, but I'd expect iteration to be more likely. Looking to the future, a Humankind sequel will be born into a different world as well. Humankind was published by Sega, but since then, Amplitude and Sega have gone their separate ways. Amplitude's last game, Endless Legend 2, was published by the same good folks who publish other games you may be familiar with. Manor Lords, Against the Storm, Old World, just to name a few of the many solid games published by Hooded Horse. A Humankind 2, should Amplitude partner with Hooded Horse, again speculative, would likely be in very good hands. And crystal ball gazing just a little bit further here, it would probably also launch in early access this time around. Nice. And hopefully that would come with the kinds of things that any good early access has. A clear plan or roadmap to act as a social contract for people to sign on to and buy into, alongside feedback opportunities, which they tend to be very good at online anyways, support, and a discount at the till, maybe most importantly to you. A lot of my wishlist ideas are ones of refinement and minor evolution, rather than throwing the baby out with the bathwater here. Better diplomacy, polished combat, more historical leaders, really everything that we've touched on in this video. Other ideas that we've chatted about would have to sit a little bit deeper. 4 or 5 main eras, historical eras, would reduce culture shift fatigue. Pair that with some adjustments to affinities, perhaps some historical pathways and leaders, and we have a system with more focus. I'd say more work is probably needed to help players stay connected to the game as well, and be aware of who their opponents actually are. Mechanically, I think districts and yields need to be reworked, to make district placement more meaningful and more significant. Ludicrously stackable, multipliable yield combos also need to be reined in to stop certain yields, like production, or gold, science, becoming seemingly infinite. Other mechanics, as we've talked about, I'm a little less phased on. Culture, religion, and trade could, though, all be better presented, as they're currently a little bit murky or unintuitive, especially for new players. Trade in particular could probably take a more Civ-like approach. And finally, I want a beautiful and polished world. The classic Amplitude visual and audio design with a stronger foundation. A world that's both vibrant and visually appealing without coming across like a cartoony mobile game, and please, no intern bugs. And I think that will about wrap up this video. Thank you so much for being here. Hopefully, it's been a thought-provoking video, and you've thought, oh yeah, I really like some of those ideas, and man, this guy is just a moron on the internet, when you've heard some of the others. They're both true. Thank you so much for watching. Please do leave your comments, ideas, thoughts, feelings down below. I'll be lurking down in this comment section on and off for quite some time, and I will see you next time.